Suggested that there's absolutely no harm from that.
Well, that's Joanna's heart.
That was found in the groundwater. I wrote a book about it. Read my book if you're interested. I discuss the Atrazine example in great detail, including what's going on in Europe.
I don't really like it that much. There you go.
You know, even Roundup, the way it was passed,
Actually, Roundup is one of the most benign
It's like
chemicals you
amazing.
conceivably have in agriculture.
Joanna, on September the 8th, Professor Hooper's coming, and he's doing a big talk here.
yeah. You're
So,
going to be here September the 8th?
he is doing it on his own.
Do you know that?
I do. I know. I actually know who asked him to come and everything. But I don't think that's any of your business. Sorry.
You can sit there if you want. I'll just take the key out.
You won't.
What's really unfortunate about this discussion?
It's about disclosure.
It's
It's about open disclosure, and you're not disclosing.
You're not disclosing.
What do you want?
I guess everything there is to say about you, and I have nothing else to say to you. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm not interested in talking to you.
Then don't.
I guess my question is, I'm sorry I'm a little bit late, but I did have a question. I wanted to ask about, Syngenta was sued originally by Illinois, and then Syngenta was sued by Illinois water districts, and it spread to 6 other states. This is about 10 years ago. Massive lawsuit over atrazine in the drinking water.
That suit is still going on in some ways. It's been mostly dismissed, but still going on.
And what Syngenta basically did was they went in and they put water filters on the water, the water system.
Once mandated by the federal government.
Right,
Yep.
to filter the atrazine that they put in the water tables
Actually, there wasn't the
to
filter.
protect it. Wait, quit interrupting me. That's really rude. I'll let you talk when I'm done, okay? And so Syngenta went in, they put in the water filters, to try to get the atrazine out of the water so that people could drink safe water. But they essentially, have not done anything to clean up the water tables or the wells or the land where, that originally poisoned the water that's going through the water system. And, in the court documents, which have just been unsealed and revealed to the public, it's shown that Syngenta basically, number one, they hired private investigators and people to harass all of, the people on the county and the judges and things like that. And that they had a list of people that they called in to tout the benefits of atrazine, and a list of 130 people who claimed to be independent and came in to say how safe atrazine was and people shouldn't worry that atrazine was in their drinking water. But essentially they permanently polluted those water tables, those wetlands, the wells of the people in these states. My question is, why do you feel that we should not be concerned here in Kauai about this when Syngenta has a long history of poisoning the water, the land, the water tables permanently for the residents, and then doing absolutely nothing to take care of the problem, and going to the lengths of hiring in private investigators and people to harass the judges and county? Yes,
Okay.
and I'll let you talk.
What you have are allegations that the EPA has looked into and found not accurate. If that does not, it probably doesn't make you convinced about it, but there is not evidence that the water supply in those communities are polluted and people are being poisoned. The levels that have been found are below the levels that the scientists have determined are remotely harmful to humans, with a buffer zone of between 1,000 and 10,000 times based on applicable studies. That may not satisfy you, but it satisfies public health and it satisfies scientists. What you have are court allegations that have been looked at by the government. The government has looked at it time and time again. You can go onto the EPA's website. I will have an article, in fact, on atrazine on Monday out in Forbes magazine about this. But the reality of it is that according to the EPA's investigations, atrazine is a benign chemical at the level that it's found in groundwater in the United States, and that these accusations are court allegations that have not been proven in court. So again, you can either believe in the science by the government or say, oh, the government's corrupted, I don't believe in the government. That's okay.
Well, actually, they're not allegations. These are records of the court from documents subpoenaed by Sargenta showing the receipts and the things that they did.
Doesn't make it a fact.
Okay, wait. I'm not saying that the
EPA has looked at this and found that it's not accurate.
But
Does that not answer the question?
Okay,
if the EPA looks at it and
hold
it's
on.
not accurate, what's wrong with
Your
that?
answer is incorrect. Your answer is incorrect.
What is incorrect?
Number one, it's not allegations. I understand what you're saying by allegations. You're saying anybody can file a lawsuit for anything. But when you have 1,000 water municipalities in the Midwest coming together to file a lawsuit against Syngenta for atrazine in their drinking water, okay, that's pretty significant, you have to admit. Number two,
and ruled on whether they believe that these water supplies are polluted.
That's not entirely true, because some of the cases are still ongoing, number one. Other cases, it was been shown that atrazine was in the water system, it was in dangerous levels, enough that they had to go in and mandatorily put filters on the water system.
No, they were mandatorily obligated to put it in cases where there were spikes. Spikes are not what the EPA uses to determine whether there's a toxic level, a dangerous toxic level of atrazine in their system.
So unfortunately for the communities where the spikes are located, they're living with permanently poisoned water tables and wells, and the
approved levels
it's supposed to be okay that there's a water filter on their tap.
The approved levels is at a level that provides a buffer of 10,000 times. There was a momentary spike that lowered the 10,000 buffer to about 6,000 from what I remember looking over the data. So if you believe that someone is being poisoned when there's a buffer of 6,000, you're welcome to believe that, but that's not what science is.
But when you're drinking water every single day, especially for children, the threshold for toxicity with atrazine is much lower.
No, it's not.
For their bodies. Yes, it is. Children have much more sensitivity to toxicity of pesticides, as proved by the American Association of Pediatrics.
The EPA has looked at this. They use data for the most vulnerable parts of the population. They use it for developing embryos, they use it for pregnant women, and they use it for children. The figures I'm telling you are for the most vulnerable parts of the population.
So you're saying, let me clarify, because I don't want us to be arguing. I want us to have a conversation. You're saying that the American Academy of Pediatrics statement that children are much more vulnerable to pesticide exposure and is what the EPA is basing these numbers off of.
That statement they're
assuming the most vulnerable person.
Developmental populations are always more vulnerable to toxic chemicals. It's all about levels of exposure and time of duration. I can tell you that the EPA, in its determinations, looked at the exposure of atrazine for all population levels. They looked at it for vulnerable populations and adult populations. And they have not found any sign that there's systematic problems with atrazine, which, by the way, despite what you may think, relative to other pesticides being used, is a relatively, comparatively, much safer chemical than other chemicals that are being used.
Can you tell me what other chemicals atrazine is safer than?
Organophosphates. Organophosphates, which were widely used and have been pretty much phased out, they were very common in the
So why do you feel atrazine is banned in so many countries?
Actually, it's banned for mostly political reasons, just same reason GMOs are banned. In Europe, you have the European Food Safety Authority, you have the German Science Association, the French Science Association. All these groups have basically said, going to the GMO issue, that GMOs are perfectly safe, and you have political bans in those countries. So
So who are the scientists that are saying they're politically safe? That they're scientifically safe.
They're members of independent science bodies similar to the
when you look at most of the scientists that are saying it's safe are scientists with ties or funding to the biotech industry, and the scientists that are saying it's dangerous is, like the scientists that are truly independent in Europe.
If you're talking about science GMOs, there's been about 1,000 studies on the food and safety. There's not one reputable study, not one, that's accepted in mainstream science that shows any harm or danger to GMOs. Not one.
Okay,
And
so
about 300 of those are studies by independent scientists that have zero ties to industry. What's so interesting is that the independent studies and the non-independent studies are very much in accord.
However, though, when you really dig into those supposedly independent studies that are pro-GMO, you know, and you look at things like subpoenaed court receipts, you start to find out that they were not so independent, that they were funded by biotech.
You can say that there's about 300 that have zero ties, at least 300 out of 1,000.
So you're saying that the only reason that atrazine and other restricted use pesticides are banned in so many countries is political?
Political meaning decisions have to be made on tolerance levels and what science suggests are the appropriate levels, and that's very debatable, and that's a political figure. What level you're going to assume, and how, whether you want a 1,000, 100 level safety factor, a 10,000 level safety factor, 100,000 level, those are all decisions that are very judgmental.
I would say, though, that, you know, a pregnant woman or a mother with a young child living near the GMO test fields would say that no level of atrazine is acceptable in her drinking water.
She could say that if she wants.
You know, because there is cumulative toxicity that will build up in the body.
We have organic chemicals that are used on Kauai. Some of them are some of the most dangerous chemicals that we have available. If you apply the same reasoning on concern about chemicals, we should basically shut down agriculture on Kauai.
So can you tell me what organic chemicals you feel are more dangerous than atrazine and restricted use pesticides?
For instance, is probably one of the most harmful things. You know, BT, which you claim is a dangerous chemical when involved in corn, is used on organic farms all the time. Actually, if you give me your email, I will send you a link to the federal government's list, 25 pages long, of the chemicals that are approved, synthetic chemicals as well, that are approved for use on organic farming.
Yes, I'm familiar with them.
What?
I'm familiar with them. I'm just interested in your view
of
about it.
Very dangerous. They have to be used with very, very tight restrictions. And if you want if you are concerned about chemical exposure, then be consistent. Then you have to basically shut down organic farming.
Here's the difference. An organic farmer, you know, out in Kilauea maybe, may once a year or twice a year put a little bit of organically approved chemicals or insecticides on their crop. But you have the fields out on the west side where it's been shown now through the documents subpoenaed by the lawyers in the Waimea case that one field alone has been sprayed 240 days out of the year. That field was sprayed. So there's a big difference when you're talking about an organic farmer or even a traditional big ag farmer who's growing, you know, heirloom crops rather than GMO crops. They may spray their field 5, 6, 7, maybe even 10 times out of a season. They're not spraying 240 days a year. So our concern on the west side is that we have people exposed to pesticides literally 3 out of 4 days. You know, 3 out of every 4 days they're breathing this in.
Again, when you try to understand chemical toxicity, you have to understand amount of exposure and duration of it. If you look at the amount of exposure and the duration, believe it or not, it's actually very, very low here in Kauai. You may not believe this, but that's what the facts show. I've looked over the records. Again, it doesn't matter that it occurs 240 days or 12 days. What's the amount of exposure? What's the duration? What do the numbers show? And what's the harm based on the scientific information? It may not satisfy you, but the numbers show that the exposure rates and the duration are not at a very serious level.
I don't think it's a matter of satisfying me. I think it's a matter of people who live along these fields who are breathing in the drift from the pesticides 240 days a year. See this wind right here? This is a calm day in Kauai. This is not an excessively windy day. It's like this all the time. So you know, when you live on an island like this, and you know, you're spraying pesticides, even ground application as opposed to aerial application, there's considerable drift, and people are genuinely sick. They're not making this up. There's genuine,
there's no empirical evidence that there's any increase
consensus
in sickness.
among.
There's no empirical evidence that there's any increase in illnesses.
You may say there's no empirical evidence that the pesticides cause an increase in illnesses, and that's absolutely incorrect.
That is not.
And there's a consensus among all the doctors on Kauai that they are seeing abnormally, extremely high birth defects, congenital birth defects, miscarriages, cancer on the west side.
Stuff that has to be reported to the Hawaii Department
Exactly. And we cannot get accurate data unless we have a list of the pesticides that are being used so that we even know what to test for. That goes back to our right to know.
But here, I'm not disagreeing with it. We're not, hold it. We have an area of agreement here.
Yeah. All we're asking for is the right to know.
Then have a bill that specifically focuses on the disclosure issue, and you can have some agreement, I think, on that issue.
So what is your disagreement with the bill? Is it the moratorium on the temporary moratorium on new experimental crops until an environmental assessment is done? You know, now why is that unreasonable? If you're going to introduce, wait. If you're going to introduce something new to the environment that genetically has never existed on this earth before,
well, actually not true. Nothing here.
It's a genetically modified organism. That form of DNA has never existed in the environment before. So then you're going to release. Wait. So you're going to test it in an open field setting after it's gone through its laboratory and its greenhouse testing. Why is it so unreasonable to simply ask for an environmental assessment before it's released in the wild to make sure there's no impact? That's not going to make the companies lose a lot of money. It's not done on Kauai in our ecosystem and how it will impact our environment.
That is actually, when the assessments are done, it would not have been, whether it's done by someone hired by Kauai doesn't really matter. The environmental assessment, in essence, is done by the U.S. Department of Agriculture before it's even allowed to get to that stage. What you're asking is that the local government, at a huge expense, do something that replicates at a level at far, far less sophistication that is already being done. I think that's wasteful.
The EPA actually went before the House committee, and they
this is a USDA.
I understand, but they admitted that the EPA and the USDA is completely
on behalf of the USDA. They do not, and they've never testified on behalf of the USDA. They don't do that.
Okay, you know what? You can Google this, and you can see the stories from what was going on in the House. They are basically asking for help because they are so overwhelmed with lawsuits for not having proper regulation and not taking action when they should have. All over the, you know.
But I do know that the process for approving agricultural new products in the biotechnology area.
We're not talking about approved products. We're talking about experimental, non-approved.
The process. That's part of the process. You have to go through the experimental, non-approved state to get, in other words, the entire process from the creation of a new product to the final stage is about a 15-year, $6 billion project. It takes an incredible amount of time by the U.S. Department of Agriculture and other departments to evaluate these things. I've written about aqua bounty, salmon, for instance. That's taken 17 years.
Wait a minute, we're talking about apples and oranges, because I'm not talking about new, approved, and regulated GMO crops. I'm talking about experimental crops that all we're asking for is an environmental assessment to be done before they're released into the environment.
The state environment right now. That is what's done by the federal government and the state.
All right.
So,
I appreciate you having a dialogue. You know,
Listen, no, you are the best advocate I've met. When you've taken this whole thing,
I am. I'm videoing it.
Yeah. You're one of the best advocates.
I hope that's okay.
That's fine.
I'm not trying to be sneaky about it. I have my.
You're one of the best advocates that I've seen for this issue, and I would invite you to write something for the Genetic Literacy Project, and we go promote it and get it out there. Our goal, we put up articles all the time about people who are critical of GMOs. We put out articles from activist websites. You're articulate, you care.
Essentially, are you just putting those articles out there so you can ridicule them and make fun of them and tear them apart? Because that's kind of what I've experienced when I'm looking at the publication.
Well, again, if you're putting it out there, it stands alone for what it is. And people might reply on Discus and say, this is a great article or a lousy article.
Yes, so you would invite the activists to write articles to your organization so you can tear them apart.
No, but I won't tear anything. You want to write it, I won't comment on the individual things.
Yeah.
I'm asking you, if you want to discourse, you have an open invitation to write if you can write a coherent article that puts together some of your arguments and you have proper links in it, it's going to go on my site. I'll tell you that. I'll give you my card and give you an opportunity to do that.
I would like your card, and I do appreciate having this dialogue today, and thanks for letting me video you.
That's fine.
I'll probably stick it on YouTube, but I'll be nice.
you can write what you want. I'm hoping for a dialogue on this.
Yeah, well, I think we had a good dialogue just now, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, look, you're a reasonable person. You're trying to figure out what the science is and what it means to you personally and what it means to Kauai. This is a blessing here. This is an amazing area here. No one wants to ruin it. I don't live here, so the issues are very personal to you. For me, the issue of biotechnology is a very personal thing to me.
Yes, because my children live here. They will probably have their grandchildren here. I want the land here and the water here to be clean for the future generations. That's my responsibility as a steward of this land.
Totally get that.
And it's not, the burden of proof is not on me to prove that these chemicals are unsafe. The burden of proof is on the companies to prove to us that they are safe.
Well,
and that has not been done yet.
If you are unwilling to accept reasonable proof, then you will never be satisfied. I'm not saying that that's how you are, but I'm saying if you say the burden of proof is on them, people say that all the time, but if nothing satisfies their burden of proof, then it's not really a genuine give and take.
I'll tell you what satisfies my burden of proof.
Okay.
And I think the burden of proof for many people on this island are truly independent environmental assessment, environmental impact studies, and truly independent scientific research from organizations and scientists that we know have the best interests of the community and the environment at heart, and not the best interests of the corporate stockholders at heart.
You don't believe that the government fits that the U.S. government fits that category?
I don't believe that anymore, because there are so many biotech industry people in high office in the government.
So you would support something like the Center for Food Safety, which is pretty much a scientifically bankrupt and somewhat corrupt organization. You would put them as an organization which activists here brought them in. So they're an organization that you'd want doing this, and you don't trust.
I don't know enough about that organization to make a clear statement, but I would trust an organization that after researching it, would deem to be truly independent. And I think other people here feel that same way.
I think the federal government is truly independent. I think there's a philosophical difference here. I don't believe that the government is corrupt on these issues. I believe it's really trying to weigh a whole lot of positives and negatives. That's really we believe in who are the best agencies and organizations to make decisions about this. I think we have a point of departure.
I do believe there's a lot of good people in the government. We have a lot of good people on Kauai Council here, on the Kauai County Council. There's a lot of good people in the government. But there is also a revolving door between the biotech industry, especially Monsanto, and very high positions of authority in regulatory offices in our government. And we have to acknowledge that. I'm not saying that's corrupt, but I think that's just a fact and an acknowledgeable fact.
I'm not going to...
So it definitely creates a conflict of interest.
Appearance of a conflict of interest that should be looked at. The reality of it is, let's be honest here. Monsanto and some of the other large companies employ more of the best scientific minds in the world that exist on this issue. That's the reality of it, because they are empowered to develop new products.
That's true. They certainly do have a lot of scientists on their payroll.
It's likely that someone from that industry will end up in policy positions, because you do want the best and the brightest. That said, you do want to make sure, to the best that we can do this, that there is not a corruption going on, that the opinions that they yield or come out with are not corrupted necessarily by their past associations. Are there people that go from one industry into the policy area and regulations? That happens in every single area.
Right.
You're not going to get someone who's going to be regulating pesticides who before was a sports reporter for the Philadelphia Inquirer. You get someone who's knowledgeable in that industry.
Right,
Is it something that should be looked at carefully and examined? You and I are on the same page on that. We don't want to accept anything at face value.
I'm not trying to spout a conspiracy theory or anything, but just from a logical point of mind, you know, that sure does look like a conflict of interest.
The same warning signs go off, but amber isn't red. Let's assume it should be amber, and then look at it and look at the decisions that they're making. And in some cases, frankly, we reject Supreme Court nominees or positions of authority all the time because of conflicts of interest. So we have to look at it on a case-by-case basis. But look, you're raising very reasonable concerns, I think.
Okay. Well, I really appreciate you having this conversation with me. It's been an interesting dialogue, and, you know, I hope that you don't get too hard of a time here on Kauai. We're passionate people. This is our home,
and
our
you
land,
have every right
and
to
you know,
bring your heart and soul to this debate, and I
All right.
admire you for doing that.
Aloha.
Bye.
Mahalo.